Sermon of the Week, Weekend. Welcome, children, to the first grade class for today. Hello, teacher, the first graders all said in disunison. Some were happy to be there, some were not. Some had no opinion on the matter. You all have a good weekend? The answers again were mixed. Some said yes, some said no, some didn't answer. What's a weekend? One young boy asked. Some in the room began to giggle and laugh. All right, quiet, the teacher barked. She gave the sternest look she could muster, but in reality she was just too sweet to have much sternness in her. What is it? The little boy who had caused the disturbance was now standing with his hand raised high. Young man, please sit down or I will have to call the warden. He did so with a scowl on his face. The school hired several wardens to assist with disturbances and rowdiness. There was also the threat of actual violence, as the country was always at war. Now, before we get started with the lesson, who can tell our young friend here what a weekend is? I can, several children yelled. The teacher recognized the cute little dark-haired girl. Stand and tell the class what a weekend is. It's the end of the week. Anyone else have an answer? I do, a blond-haired boy said. Stand and tell the class. It's the last day of the week. Better. Can anyone help him? She recognized another girl. Our week is 7 days, but the first and the last day are the weekend. So why would the end not be composed of the last 2 days of the week instead of the first and the last? I don't know. Neither do I, the teacher said, determining to delve into the question at a later date. So what's the answer? The child who asked the original question blurted out. Even teachers don't have all the answers, but we'll go with the weekend being the first and last day of the week for now. The little boy muttered as he sat back down. A girl behind him pulled at his hair. Ouch, he yelled. Teacher, she pulled my hair. Okay, class, come to order. There'll be no more of that. Are you ready to learn? Yes, most of the students said aloud. Today we start with mathematics, but first I have one more question for you. The students were hunting down their math books. Questions, questions, one little girl said to another. Okay, class, on what day of the week do you go to your temple and worship? Let's start in the front row. She pointed to the student on the far left of the front row. I worship on the first day. Next. I worship on the 10th day. Next. I worship on the 7th day. Next. I worship on the 6th day. Next. I don't worship. Next. I don't worship, but my parents do. I think it's the 2nd day. Next. I worship on the 30th day. How is it then when there aren't 30 days in the week? I don't know, but Mom takes me to the temple every 30 days. Next. Not sure. I think it's the 3rd and 7th days. Both? We go 2 times a week. Every week? Yes, teacher. Next. We go to the temple every day. Really? It's the honest truth, teacher. Next. What's worship? Well, the teacher decided it was time to get to mathematics. Thanks for all your answers. I'm going to study them in the calendars to help us all understand weeks, weekends, and worship a little better. Now take out your mathematics book and turn to page 31. But avoid foolish questions and genealogies and contentions and strivings about the law, for they are unprofitable and vain. Titus 3:9. Your Bible is a wealth of information from one end of it to the other. It is the only book that describes human history from its beginning to its end. To date, it has described 6,029 years of human history accurately and in far more detail than any other book. This is particularly true concerning the first 2 millennia of human history. For reasons unclear, there have been a myriad of attempts to disprove its accuracy without success. There are many claims arguing against its accuracy on specific points, but solid evidence against it is very limited. Probably the strongest claim against it was championed by Charles Darwin. In 1859, he published his book On the Origin of Species, which proposed the creation of the world and humanity by the God of the universe did not take place. Rather, he proposed an evolutionary origin for the Earth, life, and humanity taking place over millions of years. The battle of creation and evolution raged on, culminating in the famous Scopes trial in Dayton, Tennessee, which took place exactly 100 years ago on July 10 to 21, 1925. The Butler Act was passed by the state of Tennessee on March 1, 1925, and teacher John Scopes violated it by teaching evolution to his students. Three-time presidential candidate William Jennings Bryan argued for the prosecution against famous attorney Clarence Darrow. Scopes and Darrow and evolution lost that day, but actually won. The publicity propelled the theory of evolution forward at a rapid pace. In 2025, 97% of scientists and 60% of the population believe in evolution. When you have time, watch the movie Inherit the Wind. It is fascinating. God sent his son Christ down to earth in 4 BC as a human being. Like any human being, he had an inherent desire to learn. Viewing and detesting the corruption and evil around him and the world, he set about learning ways to correct it. His first 30 years on this earth were spent in study and observation. Christ learned a vast amount from the study of humanity and the many who had taught and argued against evil for 4 millennia. When he reached age 30, he set about correcting all the corruption and evil. He began to preach and teach the good news that evil would end. But at every turn he was challenged and spent a great deal of time arguing with his adversaries about the nature of evil. Your Bible's 4 Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, are filled with records of these confrontations. They begin when Christ actually argues with the father of evil to face, and continues through 3 years of Christ discussing and arguing and teaching with humanity at every level of society. Though Christ won every argument, all he got for his efforts was the most vile human death in history. Yet his death and resurrection accomplished 2 things unmatched in human history. He established the Christian church. And number 2, he saved all of humanity that choose to be saved. Saul of Tarsus, a Pharisee, was born in 5 AD, 9 years after Christ was born. He too studied, observed, and studied for 30 years, but believed in his mentors, the Pharisees, though he likely detested their corruption. However, he also knew of Christ, but was ordered to persecute Christ's followers, which he did with great efficiency. Here is where he diverted from Christ's beliefs, yet deep down he wasn't sure he was on the right course, but circumstances kept him doing what he was doing. This same excuse, "I can't help it," is used by human after human as an excuse for their sins. However, the God of the universe, who sees everything on earth and everywhere else in the universe, was watching their 40 years of earth history from 4 BC to 37 AD with utmost interest. He knew the existence of any life anywhere in the universe hinged on one man, and knew that the existence of life for any significant portion of humanity hinged on one other man. I'm not sure why God likes the number 40. Possibly it is because it is the only number in the English language that is in alphabetical order. God probably speaks some different language, which morphed into many at the Tower of Babel on the plain of Shinar in 2247 BC, 100 years after Noah's flood. God hunted down Saul in 34 AD, just as he hunted down Jesus in 27 AD and demanded he work for him. Just as Christ could have turned down the Messiah job, Saul could have turned down the missionary job. God blinded him for 3 days on the Syrian road leading to Damascus. The distance from Jerusalem to Damascus is 175 miles. If Paul was riding a horse, as Caravaggio's painting The Conversion of Saul suggests, it would take him about a week to travel to Damascus from Jerusalem. We aren't told if Saul was going to Damascus to hunt down more Christians or just get away from the violence for a while, but somewhere on that road, Likely in the outskirts of Damascus, God stepped in and blinded the man he wanted to continue his message of love and build his church. Saul, like Christ, was shut down by God for 3 days. Like Christ, he had studied history and the law for many years, and now would study it for 3 more years, realizing the world was corrupt and full of evil. God gave him a new name, Acts 13:9, and at age 30 Paul hit the streets with a determination unmatched. He learned this determination from the study of history, but also the study of Christ's life on earth. He must have had copies of records of the gospel writers. Possibly he had access to the Q source, commonly referred to by modern gospel scholars. Paul was given an insurmountable task, that of developing, expanding, and building up the church Christ founded into a worldwide church. Though an impossible task, Paul began his work in 37 AD, 6 years after Christ returned to heaven. Christ was a Jew, and his exposing the Jewish priests and leaders as a corrupt and evil government divided the Jews into two groups: those that stayed the course, and those that realized Christ was the better way, the Messiah, the Savior of the world. Initially, this latter group was very small, maybe 5,000 or so in Jerusalem, with small pockets of believers in various other locales. Paul had limited success in Jerusalem, so he decided to travel. He worked his way through Judea, Samaria, his hometown Tarsus, and then decided he would head west and north. He went to Cyprus, Crete, and on into Turkey and Greece, finally ending up in Rome. Everywhere he went, he preached Christ, and to his own surprise was able to set up small groups of believers and churches everywhere. People were tired of Roman oppression and saw Paul as a possible way out from under Rome's grasp. Scholars estimate Paul planted at least 14 churches during his travels, but likely he planted some form of church in every city and town he visited. My guess would be that he planted several thousand groups of peoples new to Christianity. When you start a new church, you must have someone to keep some order. There were no Christian pastors at the time, and so Paul or his cohorts would have to appoint someone to run the group or church. This would be a difficult task in any religion, especially a new one. Everyone would want some say in how the group or church was run. They also would have varying ideas of what should be learned and taught. This was probably Paul's greatest challenge. How was he to keep all these new churches and groups believing in Christ, believing in what he knew was, quotes, proper and sound doctrine as Christ had presented it? Christ was not around anymore, and Paul could only be in one place at a time, yet he had to keep the new churches and groups focused on Christ. To do this, he found men and women to help and took to writing letters to the churches he founded. At times, as we see from his book of Titus, the members of these churches would get off track, sometimes far off the track. Paul's admonition of Titus 3:9 is clear. But avoid foolish questions and genealogies and contentions and strivings about the law, for they are unprofitable unto men. This was likely happening in every group and church, just as it is today all across Christianity. As an example, the Lutheran Church, founded by Martin Luther in 1544, today has over 40 distinct denominations. Why is that? Primarily because of different interpretations of the Bible. They all believe in Christ, yet they all believe in a slightly different Christ. In fact, there are 45,000 different Christian religions in the world today. They too all believe in a slightly different Christ. And they all believe they are right. They all believe their interpretation of what Christ believes is the correct one. Yet they all admit that theirs was one and only one Christ on this earth. One and only one Messiah lived, died, and rose again for their sins. Christ saw this coming when he was on earth and constantly worked to keep belief simple to the point that even a child could understand it. God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. John 3:16. Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy soul, with all thy mind. Thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. Matthew 22:37 and 39. John had spent years studying this and knew any group or church startup would have people full of questions and those that knew all the answers. Humanity hadn't changed in 4,000 years, and Paul knew it wasn't about to change in his day either. Yet he had to change it. He attempted to monitor all his churches by communicating with letters and people he thought he could trust to keep them on the right track, the track of Christ. Overall, Paul did a pretty good job in his 30 years as leader of the Christian church. In fact, the Christian church stayed pretty much on Christ's track going forward. Emperor Constantine made it the state religion of the Roman Empire, and the Roman Catholic Church more or less mandated what Christians were to believe. Only when their corruption became so blatant did Christ have to step in and begin the reformation of his church to get it back on track. He will soon have to step in again and unite all Christians, in fact all humanity that will believe in his truth, as stated in John 3:16 and Matthew 22:37 through 39. Then, and only then, will the Christian church remain united as one for eternity. There are a myriad of different interpretations of doctrine across the 45,000 Christian religions. They vary from baptism to creation, to who God is, to the state of the dead, to when life begins, to who will go to heaven, to when Christ will return. One of the biggest flashpoints between Christian churches is what day to worship, that is, what day to go to church. For most Christians, Sunday is the day they go to church, if they go. For the remainder, some other weekend day is chosen, but who came up with the weekend in the first place? And on the seventh day which he had made, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work that he had made. And God blessed the seventh day and sanctified it, because that in it he had rested from all his work which God created and made. Genesis 2:2 and 3. Even with our limited knowledge of who and what God is, does anyone think God needed to rest after creating little planet Earth and its environs? Of course not. God's running an infinite and limitless universe and most certainly does not take any time to rest nor need such time. The universe is expanding infinitely, yet he took a whole day off just to admire his work. For 24 earth hours, God did nothing. Some will say Christ was actually the creator, and while his Father did not rest, he did. But Christ is also God, so he certainly didn't need to rest. The only answer that can be given is that it was for an example. It was for Adam's benefit. Genesis gives no other explanation. In fact, for the next 2,500 years, the Sabbath is not mentioned in all the Bible. Its next reference is in Exodus 16:22 and 23. The children of Israel were marching through the wilderness after escaping Egypt in 1491 BC. They were hungry, and so God sent manna to the ground daily, but a double portion on the sixth day, or so they could rest on the Sabbath day. 6 days ye shall gather it, but on the seventh day, which is the Sabbath, in it there shall be none. Exodus 16:26. In the remaining books of Moses, the Sabbath is mentioned prominently. Then things go cold. From Joshua through 1 Kings, it is not mentioned. It comes up again in the days of Elisha and King Ahab, who reigned from 918 to 897 BC. Israel entered Canaan in 1451 BC, So, for 500 years, the Bible doesn't mention the Sabbath at all. Though Genesis does not use the words Sunday or Saturday, it can be assumed that on the seventh day planet Earth's history, the first Sabbath was celebrated by Christ, Adam, and the angels. The Bible does not say how long a year was at that time. It would stand to reason that a God of such distinct order and purpose would make this year 52 weeks and thus 360 days. However, there is no proof of this, or is there? Prophetic time is given as a day for a year, and modern calculations interpret this as a 360-day year. However, since records other than the Bible have been kept, the summer and winter solstice, indicating 1 year has passed, have been in the realm of 365 days. This discussion will be left for another time, but if the latter is true, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday may have moved around a bit on the actual planetary calendar. The Jews had a 7-day week, but the Egyptians had a 10-day week with no Sabbath. Along came the Julian calendar in 46 BC and the Gregorian calendar in 1582 AD, the one most commonly used today. The Julian calendar is 13 days behind the Gregorian calendar. This difference will increase to 14 days in the year 2100. So with all this confusion, how does one know what day is Saturday or Sunday? Maybe Sunday is actually Tuesday in creation time. Wanting to be separate and different from the corrupt Jewish leaders, the Christian church at some point chose a different day to worship. That day was Sunday, the first day of the week. The day was first named for the sun god by the Babylonians. In 321 AD, Roman Emperor Constantine, a newly converted Christian, declared Sunday to be the day of worship for all the Roman Empire. The Catholic Church and the governments of the world have kept Sunday as the correct day for Christians to worship for centuries to come. The Jews have kept worshiping on the seventh day throughout their history. Other small groups, such as the Nazarenes, the Irish on Iona, and some Greek, French, and German groups, worshipped on the seventh day. However, Sabbath worship on the seventh day did not gain traction until the 1600s, when in 1618 a man named John Trask was arrested for teaching the seventh-day Sabbath in London. King James of the King James Bible actually followed this case. The populace was already having trouble with the domineering Church of England. The Seventh-day Sabbath Church was formed in 1650. The Seventh-day Baptist Church was formed in 1650. This and others, such as the Puritans, moved to America, where the first Seventh-day Baptist Church was established in 1671 by Stephen Mumford in Newport, Rhode Island. The church grew steadily and today has 45,000 members. After the great disappointment of 1844, when Christ did not return to earth as predicted, a young woman from Maine, 17-year-old Ellen Harmon, a Methodist, was also crushed. But she determined to continue to research the subject. Rachel Oakes, a Seventh-day Baptist who heard the preaching of those who predicted Christ's return in 1844, convinced some of the disappointed that Saturday, the seventh day, was the true Sabbath. This belief filtered into a few of those disappointed, and the Seventh-day Adventist Church was founded by Ellen Harmon White and others in 1863 in the middle of the American Civil War. Today, that church has 29 million members and is the largest church keeping the seventh day as the Sabbath. This is compared to a worldwide Jewish population of 16 million and a Protestant population of 1 billion. Through 2 millennia after Christ visited, man worshipped on one day of the week and worked the other 6. This continued even when humanity crossed the Atlantic Ocean and settled in the Americas. There was a 6-day work week and 1 day of rest, worship, or play. Even schools were open 6 days a week. But 1863, as the Civil War raged, in fact 1 month after the Battle of Gettysburg, a boy born in Michigan was given the name Henry Ford. His history is well known to all. However, in 1926 he saved America. He implemented a 5-day 40-hour work week for his Ford employees to actually improve production. It worked, and ever since, humanity in the United States has had a weekend. Among other things, this allows freedom to worship on Sunday or Saturday with no loss of income. The concept of a weekend is now 100 years old and is going strong. There is even a push by some to go to a 4-day work week. With all this confusing history to sift through, what is the right day to worship, and does it matter? It certainly does matter that we worship the God of the universe, our Creator. We would be non-existent without Him, and His fourth commandment is clear. Paul also had to sift through history and answer this same question. He was a Jew, accustomed to worshiping on the seventh day of the week. But there was even in his time a push to not be like the Jews. Paul doesn't specifically address this, but in his 1-page, 3-chapter book to the Apostle Titus, whom he calls his son, he says to avoid foolish questions. But avoid foolish questions and genealogies and contentions and strivings about the law, for they are unprofitable and vain. Titus 3:9. Paul exhorts us to holding fast the faithful word as he hath been taught. Titus 1:9. Paul adds, they which have believed in God might be careful to maintain good works. Titus 3:8. Paul says, believe in God, believe in His Word, believe in what you are taught by Him and His believers, and then act like it. You can be a good person, and you can be a good witness to those around you. The fourth commandment indicates that worship is essential for all mankind, yet only 25% of the world is Christian, and only 30% of those attend church weekly. This leaves us at 7.5% of the world's 8 billion people worshiping the true God. This 600 million can be added to approximately the same percentage of 2 billion Muslims attending church. Therefore, 1.2 billion, or 15% of the world's 8 billion people, even worship God regularly. Suffice it to say that God's believers have a lot of work to do. Paul also had a lot of work to do. He started at 0%. After 2,000 years, worship of God has reached 15%. Quick calculations indicate it will be the year 13,332 AD when 100% is reached. Even if we give God's worshippers the benefit of the doubt and say an additional 15% worship God regularly in ways other than going to church regularly, we are still at a woeful 30% of humanity. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days shalt thou labor and do all thy work, but the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord thy God. In it thou shalt not do any work, thou, nor thy son, nor thy daughter, nor thy manservant, nor thy maidservant, nor thy cattle, nor thy stranger that is within thy gates. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea, and all that in them is, and rested the seventh day. Wherefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it. Exodus 20:8-11. There are 313 words in the Ten Commandments of the King James Version of Exodus 23-17, of which 94 are the fourth commandment. That does tell us something. God puts at least as much importance, if not more, on worshiping Him than following any of the other 9 commandments. Does God need the worship of a few insignificant humans in a vast, infinite universe? Maybe, maybe not. But us few insignificant humans need God to even exist, and worship is the way to supply that need, combat evil, and join God in eternity. Welcome back, class. I hope you all had a good weekend, the teacher said. The first grade class said reconvene for the week. This would be the same class that endured the question and answer period concerning the week and weekend and worship. They were acting as their usual selves and none of the worse for wear. The teacher always wondered what each of them did on the weekends, but never broached the subject. She was here to teach and was considered the top first-grade teacher in the city. She had been offered a number of higher-paying jobs, but liked where she was. For reasons unclear to her, the first-graders of this school seemed to bring out the best in her. Today we will begin with mathematics, but first I want to do a little follow-up on what we talked about last Friday. Not that again, the little girl said rather loudly. Yes, that again. Won't take long. I just have one more question for you. All right, get it over with. I'm here to learn. That's what my mom says, another little girl said. Children, do any of you know the Ten Commandments? Ah, come on, not that again, the tall little boy in the back of the class said. Despite his words, about half the class raised their hands. Does any of you know some of them? I do. Thou shalt not kill. Thou shalt not steal, a young boy said. Thou shalt not swear, another boy said. Thou shalt not covet. Good, the teacher said. I'm going to write all 10 of them quickly on the board and then ask you one more question. Then we'll move on to mathematics. She got up and quickly in her perfect handwriting wrote, no other gods, no images, no swearing, worship, honor parents, no killing, no cheating, no lying, no stealing, no coveting. What does covet mean? The little boy who had struggled with the word earlier asked. Can anyone tell him? It means to not want something that isn't yours, the short little boy in the front row said. The boy next to him grabbed his pencil. Yeah, that's what it means, the boy said, giving the other boy back his pencil. All right, come to order. Now my question is, what is the easiest commandment to keep? Kill, the boy said in the middle of the room. No, that's not right. My uncle killed a man, the boy next to him said. Gods, another said. Covet, another said. Worship is hard. I hate church. Steal, another said. No, that's not right, the girl next to her said. Everybody steals. Everybody lies, too, another said. Well, I try not to, but sometimes I swear, a boy in the back said. The answers now quit coming, as the students all studied the board with an interest that surprised the teacher. After a couple of minutes, she broke the silence. All right, students, I want you all to take a piece of paper and write down the one commandment you think is the easiest to keep. Remember now, not the easiest to break, but the easiest to keep. You mean vote? A little girl said in the front row. Yes, vote for one. The one commandment you think is the easiest to keep. I'll tally up the votes tonight and let you know tomorrow what number the winner is. To her surprise, everyone took their pencil and quickly voted. Aaron, will you collect all the votes and bring them to me? Remember now, vote for only one commandment. Aaron collected all the votes and brought them to the teacher's desk. She promptly counted them. Thank you, Aaron and class. All 30 votes are here. I'll count them tonight. Teacher, can't you count them now? A little girl asked. No, I will tonight and give you the result tomorrow. Now open your mathematics books to chapter 10.